Thank you, Veronique. Hi, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to this is the first of 4 seminars that we will have featuring presentations from research teams funded through the Patient Working Group, Patient Voices in Research Initiative. That's led by, as I said, the Patient Working Group members of our network. This seminar will start with an introduction about this innovative funding program by James Pereira here in the call, and we will hear from our presenters today. So I also want to thank Veronique Leblanc, our scientific writer and program manager in the network that is organizing all these seminar series, featuring all the fantastic work that has been happening during phase 1 of the network that is coming to fruition now. So I'll pass it over to James.
I think we're going to jump in a couple more before we pass it over to James. But thank you so much, Isabel, and welcome, everyone. It's really exciting to start hearing from the teams funded through this really exciting program. So I won't take long, but I just want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. We will be keeping questions until the end of the seminar. So you can either type your question in the Q&A box, which is at the top. You can find at the top of your screen, the speech bubbles with a little question mark in it, or you can wait until the question period and raise your hand, and we'll allow you to unmute and ask your question live. I do also want to take a moment to acknowledge that I personally am calling in today from Mi'kmaq, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Our network members and our speakers and our attendees today are located all over the country on lands that are home to diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And I invite everyone here to honor and pay respects to those peoples and reflect on the importance of the lands and waters that we all currently call home. I also have the pleasure of introducing my co-chair today, Rosaline. Rosaline is one of the inaugural members of the network's patient working group, and she's contributed to many different projects and initiatives within the network over the past few years. So thank you so much, Rosaline, for everything that you do and for generously volunteering to co-chair this seminar as well. I'll pass it to you if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and then kick off the seminar.
Thank you, Veronique. Happy Earth Day. I'm Rosaline Kraft. I live in Coquitlam, British Columbia, which sits on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. As Veronique said, I have been a member of the Marathon of Hope's Patient Working Group from its inception in 2023. I have been living with metastatic breast cancer since 2018. At the time, I was told that I'd have 2 years ahead of me, but here I am. And I credit my survival to newer treatments, including in precision oncology, and the participation in 2 clinical trials. I have a background in research and engineering, and nowadays work as a patient partner and advocate. Beyond other causes, I advocate for new treatments and better conditions for patients with advanced cancer. I am looking forward to today's presentations by Dr. Navani on non-small cell lung cancer and Dr. Pollard on clinical trials that are more patient-centered. Both are themes very dear to me. As I mentioned, I have participated in clinical trials that I believe have extended my survival. And my father was diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer in 2014. It was a stage 4. With fewer treatments available back then, he passed away less than 1 year after his diagnosis. My mom was his main caregiver. She had practically no supports other than those provided by the family. When he passed, she had lost 1/3 of her body weight. She was later diagnosed with breast cancer and came to die in 2020, but not from her stage 1 disease. It was rather from treatment complications. So Dr. Navani's and Dr. Pollard's project were funded by the Patient Voices and Research Initiative. James Pereira, also a member of the Patient Working Group, who participated in the initiative from start to finish, including as a reviewer, will give us an overview of the funding program and how it all came together. Off to you, James.
Well, thank you, Rosaline. I appreciate that. And everyone, first of all, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here today and an honor to be introducing the Patient Voices in Research Initiative. So first off, the vision of the patient working group, the overall vision, as the ultimate recipients of precision oncology, cancer patients should play a central role in determining how we implement it across Canada. That's the underlying vision for us. And patient working group members, first of all, we are made up of over 30 patients, survivors, and caregivers from 9 provinces. And the working group is engaged at all levels of the network, as well as taking leadership roles in building collaborations, creating educational opportunities, and defining network priorities. In addition to members, some of us are members of other network working groups. Several of us participate in network conferences and events. We act as ambassadors of the network. Several of us are involved in developing educational materials related to precision oncology, and that's just a few of the tasks that we are involved in. So going on to the Patient Voices in Research initiative, we wanted to focus on centering the lived and living experience at all levels. We looked at the fact that people with lived experience are being involved at all levels of research. Patient involvement and engagement is becoming more common in research projects, as well as people with lived experience serve on grant evaluation committees with other organizations, for example, CCS and OCC. We look further back upstream and asked ourselves, can we create a grant process involving people with lived experience from start to finish? Can research addressing the concerns of people with lived experience be advanced through a dedicated grant process and in turn improve the patient experience? Which values and themes are most important to people with lived experience? As well as, are there research data available on these themes? These questions led to the development of the Marathon of Hope Cancer Centers Network's Patient Voices in Research funding program, which is led by the network's patient working group and was spearheaded and envisioned by Dr. Nicole Beauchemin, who was the co-chair of the patient working group, and we thank her for her leadership on this. So the first step that we worked on the initiative happened in March and May of 2024, where we developed research themes. We had several discussions to identify and refine these themes. It was achieved through consensus across the patient working group, and we provided specific examples for each theme in the request for application that went out. These themes were, first off, equity, access, and disparities related to the continuum of precision medicine care, clinical trials access, patient involvement and engagement in precision oncology research. Number 4, survivorship, care plans, and post-treatment resources. 5, lifestyle interventions in precision oncology. And finally, rare cancers across the age spectrum. Looking at those themes, we went on to the next step. The next stage was preparing and launching the RFA. This happened in June of 2024. We developed evaluation criteria that was co-developed with TFRI and the patient working group, which meant that the patient working group was also involved in how the applications would be evaluated. The relevance to research themes, potential for impact, innovation, and originality, patient involvement and engagement, including knowledge translation, equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility principles, feasibility, applicability to MOHCCN activities and the future of the network, and collaboration across institutions and provinces was encouraged, but not required. And this was stated in the RFA. And then very importantly, the required applications had to be written in plain language. The competition closed in August of 2024. And even this was a record for the number of applications that were received, 38 applications, which showed there was a lot of interest from the research communities and made it abundantly clear that patients have good ideas that need to be tackled. Next steps were, first off, the reviewing of the applications. This happened in August and September of 2024. It involved 19 patient working group members who volunteered as reviewers. There was a huge amount of work performed by the reviewers who volunteered many hours of their time, both working on individual reviews, and then culminating in the virtual committee meeting that happened after the initial reviews. Each application was reviewed by 3 patient working group members and a scientific advisor, which was Dr. Nicole Beauchemin, as I mentioned, the patient working group co-chair. It was good to see that all the reviews from the reviewers were received on time. And then we met as a group at the virtual committee meeting to discuss all the applications, and that took about 8 hours. All the applications were ranked to recommend funding by TFRI. The next step was the awarding of the funding, which was announced in December 2024. And following consideration by network leadership, 10 applications were awarded. Because of the huge amount of interest and the record number of applications, and very importantly, the quality of applications, it led to TFRI almost doubling the initial funding envelope, which went up to $1.8 million, which meant each project received up to $250,000 per project. This was obviously an increase from the original $1 million that had been projected. The final step was following the projects and then looking at renewing the PBRI competition. Obviously, we are looking at lessons learned from this whole process. First off, the enthusiasm and dedication of patient working group members combined with their excellent ability to evaluate high-quality science related to their cancer experience. Looking at the success, asking applicants to describe their research in plain language. This is hugely important when it comes to patients understanding the science. The incredible cooperation of multidisciplinary research teams across Canada to identify new solutions in cancer treatment, care, and survivorship. The interest, basically once the project got going, we launched what we call the Patient Liaison Program to help support the research teams. It involved the matching 2 members of the patient working group to each project to learn about project progress and also provide support. There were lots of lessons learned from this initiative, and we will take these experiences into consideration when working out how we do it again. All this process and learning experience and the success of the PBRI shows us the tremendous power of the Marathon of Hope Cancer Centers Network and how this initiative is envisioned, created, and inspired by patients. And that's something we will be looking at to see how we can improve the program for PBRI 2.0. With that, I'd like to acknowledge all the members of the patient working group, as well as our new co-chairs, Catalina Lopez-Correa and Dora Cavallo-Medved, the former chairs, Nicole Beauchemin and Natalie Lamarche-Vade, former members, as well as, sadly, a few members who have left us, Christine McKay, Evelyn Peterson, and Robin McGee. I'd also like to acknowledge the entire TFRI team who supported us and worked in concurrence with us on the Marathon of Hope Cancer Centers Network. With that, I'd like to say thank you. And today, you get an opportunity to hear from two of the researchers who got awarded the funding. And over the next 3 sessions, you'll hear from other researchers as well. So without much ado, I'll turn it back to Veronique to take us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for that wonderful overview of what the Patient Voices in Research Initiative was and just how much work went into it by the entire patient working group. So we are so appreciative to all of you for making this happen. And I do also want to give a quick shout out to Jessie Michaluk, one of our program managers who was really instrumental in making this particular program and all our competitions happen. So thank you to everyone who was involved. And thank you for your presentations, James.
Thank you.
With that, as James said, we are now ready to start the presentations from the teams who were funded through this competition. So we will get started with Dr. Vishal Navani, who's a medical oncologist at the Arthur J. E. Child Comprehensive Cancer Center, a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Oncology at the Cumming School of Medicine at the University of Calgary, and the early phase in lung cancer clinical trials lead at Alberta Health Services. Today, Dr. Navani and a few members of his team, Michelle Leanne Dean and Amanda Gibson, will be telling us about their project looking at patient-reported outcomes of people experiencing lung cancer. So please take it away.
Thanks so much, Veronique. And I just want to say thank you again to the TFRI and the generous support for our research study, PROPEL, patient-reported outcomes of people experiencing lung cancer. Slide, please. So this study was designed to investigate a paradox in lung cancer care, where there are 2 very different speeds of progress happening at the same time. On one hand, we've never been better at the science for patients with lung cancer, discovering about the biology and the underlying pathology of that disease. But on the other hand, we've rarely been slower at the delivery of these new precision therapies into the hands of the people that need them the most, the patients. We also add to that paradox by, in our minds, not understanding the lived experience of lung cancer. You, the patients, are experts of the lived experience, and you know that surviving lung cancer is about life outside that snapshot in the clinic, but it's about how lung cancer impacts the way you feel, the quality of your day-to-day life, and how it impacts those loved ones around you. So PROPEL was designed to look at this paradox by examining the pathway that starts with the discovery of new therapies for lung cancer and ends at a common destination of quality survivorship for patients diagnosed with these diseases. Along this pathway between drug discovery and survivorship, we looked at 3 stops along the way: the delay that drugs have as they move through approvals and funding, the delivery of those drugs, and the impact of those drugs on improving survival for patients with lung cancer in routine care outside the controlled clinical trial environment. And finally, the day-to-day impact of these novel therapies to patients and their real-world experience of living with these diseases. So by examining the delay, the delivery, and the day-to-day, we're building the knowledge and evidence needed to push for equitable and effective care. Slide, please. PROPEL used a mix of federal and provincial data sources to investigate the delay. Real-world data from the repository that we're privileged to run, the GlanceLook Research Database, Canada's largest lung cancer real-world outcomes database. And we developed a prospective patient-reported outcomes study, a trial of patient-reported outcomes to investigate that day-to-day of patients' lives with these diseases. Those patient-reported outcomes used a broad and inclusive design. Patients from all across Alberta, the province that self-identified as having lung cancer, were able to enroll independently and complete a series of ethics-approved questionnaires which translated their experiences into measurable quality of life data exposing care gaps beyond routine clinic symptom screening. We feel that unique to PROPEL is that the data and the collection and analysis happens entirely outside the clinic. Patients do this at home, outside the healthcare system, and we feel it allowed more honest responses than the usual trial outcomes that we capture. Slide, please. So, as we go through, yeah, thank you. So as we go through and we talk about PROPEL in detail, I will lead it to my colleagues, Amanda Gibson, Michelle Dean, and Mobalaji Bosende, to talk about how we organize the study, the metrics that we captured, the data that we've already published. No thanks in part to the generous support of TFRI. And then I'll make a cameo at the end to maybe plot some paths forwards on where we're going to go together.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mobalaji, and I'm also part of the PROPEL study team. This slide highlights how the PROPEL study was co-developed with patients and caregiver partners, known as our study ambassadors. 6 lung cancer survivors and caregiver partners helped shape the patient-reported outcomes, ensuring the study reflects real-world experiences. They also reviewed the questionnaires covering symptoms, quality of life, and overall impact. Overall, this makes the study truly patient-centered. I'll now hand it over to the next speaker, Amanda.
Thank you. So what did the PROPEL study find? So first we looked at the delay and the delivery. And so the PROPEL study found that lung cancer precision and therapies in Canada, it took more than 3 years to move from discovery to funded access. And that's much longer than the roughly 1.5 years suggested by published timelines. This process is also highly inequitable because funding and eligibility vary by province. In Alberta, that delay has major consequences. If 5 patients with stage 4 lung cancer are diagnosed on the day a drug is shown to be effective, only 2 will still be alive by the time that drug is publicly funded. So for each new lung cancer drug, this delay means about 1,000 years of disease control lost and 900 years of life lost. We then looked at patient support programs, which help reduce this access gap before public funding. In Alberta, they've provided more than $2.4 million worth of lung cancer drugs to over 150 patients in the past decade. But these are not equitable programs, and they remain only a temporary solution. And next, we looked at the day-to-day experience of lung cancer. Patient-reported outcomes showed clear impacts on both patients and caregivers. Diagnosis caused financial stress, and 15% reported significant financial hardship. Most patients were on treatments and had symptoms or side effects, but with limited impact on their functioning. The biggest impacts were psychosocial. Compared with before their diagnosis, people reported more disconnection, more worry about the future, and over 30% said their life lacked meaning. This is not a small gap in care. This reflects a system-level failure to provide enough support. For caregivers, PROPEL is one of the first Canadian studies to examine their experience with lung cancer. Caregivers often felt unseen by healthcare teams. They neglected their self-care, they had poor emotional well-being, and worried about the impact of the diagnosis on the rest of the family. This points to serious caregiver burnout and distress in a system which relies heavily on unpaid caregiving and shows that the system must do more to support them.
And what does this mean for people impacted by lung cancer? Data from the PROPEL study has identified the delays that limit patient access to new effective lung cancer therapies. Patient and caregiver reported data also found current gaps in care that occur outside of the clinic and an immediate need for better awareness of the challenges of living with lung cancer. These results directly inform supports that could have a positive impact on well-being. Knowing something is true is not enough. The PROPEL study has now collected the evidence in the right form, at the right time,
to help drive system-level improvement. Your support of the PROPEL study has had lasting impacts, both in our other related initiatives that we've undertaken in the last year and in shaping our future goals. Ongoing initiatives directly linked to PROPEL are the recent launch of the GLR Lung Education website to support patients, caregivers, and healthcare providers with ALK inhibitor treatment information, ongoing analysis of the impact of patient support programs in Alberta with the goal of reducing barriers to patient enrollment, and a project studying the effectiveness of immunotherapy in lung cancer to see if these drugs are working as well in the real world as they did in clinical trials. We're also actively seeking financial support to continue the PROPEL study and keep patient voices heard, and expand enrollment to Western Canada, as well as increase diversity and gather a broader range of perspectives. We also aim to translate the GLR Lung Education website into multiple languages for increased accessibility and adding patient toolkits that support shared decision-making and self-advocacy.
Thank you. We believe PROPEL is the start of something new. We've demonstrated that these are impactful analyses and the collection of validated patient-reported data outside the healthcare system is feasible and actionable. We believe that the foundational investigations of the study can support network strategies in 3 ways. First, they underpin what national precision oncology standards should be by using a common set of outcome measures that can be used across provinces to define, monitor, and compare quality of care. Secondly, they advance equity-focused research by capturing the experiences of the underserved and geographically diverse populations that we live within, making the disparities in access and outcomes more visible and measurable. And then finally, the data that we've collected and the manuscripts that we've published strengthen policy and resource advocacy by generating real-time, human-centered evidence of where bottlenecks and inequities lie. Slide. We just want to acknowledge the co-investigators across the province of Alberta in academic and community centers that supported and promoted this project, our patient research partners, ambassadors who co-designed PROPEL, the local, national, and international community that supported PROPEL and allowed us to share our findings. And there are some logos here of the various scientific meetings and community partners that we've engaged with and published with. And finally, most importantly, I'm grateful for the people impacted by lung cancer, the patients and their caregivers that allow me in my practice the privilege of being able to care for them and sharing their time and their experiences.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your great presentation, Dr. Navani and team. Now we will have a presentation by Dr. Samantha Pollard. Dr. Pollard is an assistant professor of professional practice in the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University and an investigator at the BC Children's Hospital Research Institute. Today, Dr. Pollard will tell us about the project she led developing a patient-centered clinical trial design framework for precision oncology. Dr. Pollard.
Thanks very much, Rosalind. Can everybody see my slides? Okay, wonderful. Thanks very much for having me. So I'm going to talk today about a project called PAC, which is the development of a patient-centered clinical trial design framework for precision oncology. But before I go, I just want to acknowledge that I am very fortunate here to be calling in from Vancouver, BC. I'm calling in from BC Children's Hospital on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Stolo nations. So I'd just like to spend a little bit of time talking about sort of what catalyzed this project. So myself and a number of members of the research team are members of the Health Technology Assessment Working Group with the MOHCCN. And a few years ago, we had the opportunity to actually sit down with members of the patient working group. And we were discussing issues related to equity and how the network can work together to expand access to precision oncology research and, of course, innovation as well. And through these discussions, we talked a lot about, how high quality evidence really requires comprehensive, high quality, and representative data from patients. And, thinking about, everything comes back to patients. Everything comes back to the patient experience and how we can enroll patients in trials, ensure that patients are interested in participating and that they're able to participate in clinical trials. And that really formed the genesis of this entire project. Thinking about, how can we go about making precision oncology trials better suited such that patients are able to participate, they're willing to participate and motivated to participate, and also ensuring that clinical trials are generating valued outcomes for patients. And so that's really what started this proposal. And so based on those early conversations, we generated this research question, which is how can precision oncology trials directly address research participant preferences, expectations, and address those barriers. And so our project spans 3 separate activities. So the first was a scoping literature review where we really wanted to find out, well, what do we know already about precision oncology and clinical trial participation more broadly? What are these barriers? And one thing that we found is that a lot of this information was very negatively framed. So we have a pretty good idea of what some of these barriers are to trial participation, but there was very limited information in terms of actionable recommendations. And another thing that was missing from the literature was integration of caregiver perspectives as well. And so that literature review really helped inform subsequent research activities. Activity 2 was a pan-Canadian study where we recruited adults with either a personal diagnosis of cancer or who reported as being an informal caregiver to someone with cancer. So a loved one, a spouse, a friend. And we wanted to bring them together to discuss, and they had the choice as to whether they wanted to participate in an interview or a focus group, and discuss with us what are some of the challenges that you have experienced or that you foresee when thinking about participating in a clinical trial and a precision oncology clinical trial. And then based off of the literature review, we also wanted to identify recommendations. So what do you recommend for future oncologists and trialists to be thinking about when designing clinical trials? And through that effort, we conducted a thematic analysis of our transcripts, and we generated what we called a clinical trials framework, which was essentially a very long list. It had about 59 elements of recommendations that came from the literature review and as well as from the interviews and focus groups. And this was intended to inform, what can this framework really look like? And so we distributed a survey, a pan-Canadian survey, and we wanted to identify, thinking broadly, we recruited more patients and caregivers, we recruited oncologists, we recruited trialists. We also recruited members of research ethics boards to be able to comment on our draft framework. And we asked them not only to rank each element in terms of importance, but as this is somewhat of a hypothesis generating exercise, we also wanted participants to comment on feasibility, because of course, when we develop this framework, we want it to be implemented. But prior to any implementation, of course, we have to think about what are the barriers to implementing these changes across Canada. And so we as a team were incredibly fortunate to have 7 patient partners work with us as part of the research team. So a number of members of the patient working group, as well as some others that had expressed interest. And so they worked with us really from project outset. They worked to co-develop study documentation, including consent forms. We co-developed the interview guide and focus group guide. We were also able to meet with our patient partners partners halfway through data collection to discuss early findings and to iterate on the topic guide, the interview and focus group topic guide. And they also helped us inform that translation of our qualitative findings into the framework itself. So our patient partners were very actively involved, and it's been a complete pleasure to work with all of them. And I know a number of them are on the call today, so thank you all for being here. And then, of course, beyond members of the research team, we also engaged patients and caregivers throughout each phase of the research trajectory. So, for example, we were able to recruit 34 patients and caregivers to participate in our activity 2 interviews and focus groups. These were virtual, and participants had the option. They could choose when the interview is conducted and if they wanted to discuss these issues in a group setting or in an interview setting as well. We also administered our survey, our framework survey in activity 3 to patients and caregivers as well, to again bring that patient and caregiver voice into the implementation phase of this work. So what were some of our results? So I only have a little bit of time to talk here, so I wanted to kind of focus a little bit on the main findings from our qualitative work. And so we had the opportunity to, in these interviews, to really capture perspectives and experiences and, you know, even anticipated barriers from patients as well as caregivers. And so these conversations really spanned that entire trajectory from first hearing about a clinical trial through barriers to actually participating in a trial, types of data collection, as well as what it's like to be at the end of a trial and what patients and caregivers, what kind of information they want to receive back, and what kind of supports would help them participate. And so our conversations were very broad and very much driven by what our participants wanted to talk about. And so this is a really good example. One thing we heard from participants time and time again was, how do we even find out about clinical trials? Where do we find them? Participants often talked about wanting to be able to hear this information from their healthcare providers, so from their oncologists. We spoke to one participant who had been involved in at least one trial, and she said, both of those trials, I was the one to raise the topic of a trial to my oncologist. So in this sense, what we found was that often participants felt that clinical trials were framed as a separate entity rather than a part of the cancer care trajectory. And that became one of our recommendations, is to bring up these conversations early in the treatment trajectory. Participants also talked a lot about simply the experience of being a participant. And often they talked about this in terms of just being a patient experiencing cancer and going through the treatment itself. Participants wanted to be referred to by their names. They wanted to be acknowledged as a full human rather than simply a data point, for example. And related to this, there was a strong sense of vulnerability that we heard across participants, both patients as well as caregivers. There were hesitancies to raise questions with physicians or trial oncologists. They didn't know, sometimes they weren't sure if they should raise a question or a concern or be framed as complaining. And so that inherent vulnerability really, really came through. And a lot of these, we felt that could be translated to, you know, improving communication and open on and inviting communication from participants. We also had more granular conversations around, well, if you were approached to participate in a clinical trial, what's the kind of information that you would want? And, you know, specifically when we think about precision oncology, there's often limited evidence around how a patient might respond to a novel treatment, for example. And participants understood that, but what they wanted was a really good sense of being able to be prepared for what might happen to them when participating in a clinical trial. So this individual said, you know, there's nausea and then there's nausea. And really the conversation that framed this quote was really around, if I'm going through a consent procedure and I see the word nausea, I want to know what that means. Does it mean I'm going to have to take time off work? Does it mean I can treat my nausea with medication? Does it mean I'm going to be bound to my bed and I need a caregiver to come in? They wanted to be prepared, better prepared for what the experience of a clinical trial was going to, how it was going to bear on their life. And then, of course, something that came up very, very frequently across our conversations was around access to clinical trials to begin with. As we know, many clinical trials are conducted and administered out of large city centers where that research infrastructure is already set up, it's already established. But we had many, many conversations around the challenges of having to travel or not being able to be eligible for a clinical trial given its location. One person had said, "I'm so lucky that my husband works from home." And that was, because she had someone to be able to drive her or support her throughout the participation of a trial. And then finally, as I mentioned, we were incredibly fortunate to be able to have a lot of conversations with caregivers as well. And I thought that this quote was really powerful, saying nobody cares about the caregiver. We had a lot of detailed discussions around what it takes to care for someone who's participating in a trial. So having to take time off work, give up evenings to help someone who is recovering from treatment, for example. Many caregivers talked about having to get their own childcare and organize childcare or family care for their own families so that they could be there for patients. And so this really highlighted the critical and important role of caregivers that are so necessary for patients going through trials, but often forgotten when we think about trial design. And so based on this thematic analysis, and of course I said I'm only able to talk about some of these results given our time limit here, but we translated this through our thematic analysis into a set of recommendations or framework elements, and they spanned improving patient-centeredness. A lot of these recommendations focused on improving communication between patients and their oncologists or trialists. And of course, a number of recommendations around how to improve the logistical aspect of clinical trial participation as well. So we spoke to a number of people, for example, who were unable to travel. So they may have lived alone, or they were in a wheelchair and they were unable to, travel to a large city center. And a lot of these challenges were not just unique to trials, but also span their cancer care trajectory as well. So we had a lot of recommendations that really referred to how can we make the process and aligning sample collection with routine appointments, virtual appointments where possible. So all of these sorts of things went into our framework. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one thing that we were really excited about incorporating into this project was not only finding out what is important to people, but also what are the feasibility considerations. And so these elements here, these are kind of our top 4 elements that were identified as being critically important, but also potentially challenging in terms of feasibility. So allocating trial funding to supporting caregivers, funding trial staff to go out into community and do data collection so that participants themselves didn't have to travel. And so this is, I think, really the meat of the project in terms of how do we tackle these challenging aspects and how do we start conversations around redesigning clinical trials with these specific features in mind. And so very briefly, when I think about, when we think about the impact on patients, of course, we're over the left-hand side of this image here, working on increasing awareness of these barriers and, thinking about working between these orange and blue cells here. Our hope is, of course, that as we begin to identify specific elements that we can implement, and this is going to be, a long process. We can't implement these elements overnight, but working to enhance research access, working to enhance the reach of precision oncology trials, alongside increasing that trust and that ability to communicate between patients and oncologists, and ideally improved retention within trials, better evidence, faster evidence, and of course, faster access to precision oncology innovations and outputs that reflect the outcomes that patients are interested in. And in terms of future...
So sorry to interrupt. Your slides are a little bit blurry. I wonder if you'd like me to share the version that I have.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Have they been blurry the whole time?
They were mostly resolving at first, but then the last one didn't
Oh, sure.
quite
Yeah,
resolve.
you can.
Yeah.
Sure, sure. Thanks. Just those last couple would be great.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's okay. I'm almost done anyways. You can click to the next slide. Great. And so as I mentioned, we are very much at the beginning of this program of work. We are beginning to, I have been having a number of meetings with our group of patient partners, and we'll be having more meetings to really think about what elements can we prioritize, how can we start to implement this framework. And so you'll see in the medium term at the bottom, one of the recommendation that was really, really clear to us was, how do we improve and expedite communication between trial participants and their oncologists. And so Dr. Lim and I, one of the co-investigators on this project, have just received funding from the BC Cancer Foundation to look at the role of generative AI to help expedite information transfer between patients who are in trials and their oncologists, particularly when things like adverse events or symptoms come up in the middle of the night. So this is just one example of sort of where we're going with this program of work. Next slide. And finally, I just want to acknowledge my incredible research team, as you'll see, a number of patient partners, as well as my pan-Canadian and multidisciplinary team that I've been incredibly fortunate to work alongside throughout the last 18 months. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to all of them and the patient partners who are so wonderful. And I could not have done any of this work without them. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Sam. That was great. Like I said, we're now going to have a Q&A period. So we don't have any questions in the Q&A box, but if you do have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we can allow you to unmute and ask them live. And I think Rosaline has one to get us started.
Yes, thank you so much, Veronique. Thank you to all speakers. They were wonderful presentations. I have a question to Dr. Navani and his team. In view of the data you collected in your research, would your team support patient advocates working to help reduce the time between a drug, when a drug is first approved and when it becomes available in provincial formularies? I know that there is room for work with drug manufacturers, with the Health Canada, Canada's drug agency, or INAS in Quebec, and also with the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance and the provinces during negotiations.
So it's the backlogs. To preface the question, I consult for the CDA on new drug submissions and whether drugs should be funded or not in lung cancer. So the roadblocks are many. I think at a very basic level, the quality associated life year, the value placed upon improvement and quality of life for a year has not increased for almost 3 decades. So it's still 50,000 Canadian dollars a year. And so that amount is much lower than comparable developed nations or G7 nations. And so that at its crux is a reason that we get drugs slower than other developed nations. Because if the sponsor's not going to get paid because the price they're getting paid hasn't been adjusted upwards for 3 decades, they're not going to bring the drug to Canada. At the end of the day, it is only the private sector that has the capacity to run pivotal studies to allow drugs to get funded. So that's a problem. Another is the advocacy is needed to help work on that problem. And that's partly why we do this and publish data and discuss with our partners about ways to pressure funders and regulatory bodies to change the landscape. In addition to that, we are 14 separate nations when it comes to medical care. Like, we are not one nation. I've had the good fortune of practicing in other countries like the United Kingdom and Australia, where things are universal. And when a drug is approved and funded, boom, it's there to everyone. Whereas there can be years between a patient getting a drug in Alberta versus Prince Edward Island. In fact, there are patients that moved from Prince Edward Island to Nova Scotia to get access to their life-saving targeted lung cancer therapy. So look, there are many problems, and we'll be publishing a manuscript or two on this in the coming years. But I think advocacy and pressure on the pain points by all of us is sorely needed so we can get drugs to patients quickly.
Thank you so much. It's very clarifying. So, Nicole, you have the first question.
You're on mute, Nicole. You should be able to unmute yourself, and unfortunately I can't do it. Okay, perhaps we can ask Christine to ask a question, and then we can try to work this out. Nicole, I know I also have your questions in writing.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I noticed that you both proposed a couple of recommendations. But I kind of wondering who are the actually the end users? Is the clinicians, is the patients, or is the policymakers? I want to know what's that. And also, how do these recommendations reach the right people? And also, more importantly, I think, I want to know who is responsible for carrying these recommendations forward and make sure they lead to the actions.
I can start with that one.
Whoever both can answer.
Sure, I'm happy to start. So thank you for that question, Christine. I think those are both great questions. So I have for our project, we have a number of different audiences, and the audiences actually evolved throughout the course of the project. So one thing that we, the patient, we call it the knowledge mobilization committee on our project, this group of 7 patient partners. And one thing that we, after the qualitative work, we realized that, when we think about things like allowing trial staff to travel into communities, it's not just a funding issue, but it could also be an issue related to research ethics. Research ethics boards need to provide approvals for all of these trials. And we actually had the opportunity to present our early findings to the BC Cancer Research Ethics Board in December. And we had a really great discussion around how do we enable these kinds of not newer trial designs. So for us, research ethics boards, certainly some of our recommendations were directed to oncologists as well. But then there's other audiences. So one of the recommendations was around, providing oncologists with professional development opportunities such that they are aware of trials so that they're able to speak with their patients. But of course, that requires a lot. That requires oncologists to have time out of their day. So there's, the audience gets bigger and bigger, but I think the key audiences for our project was certainly research ethics boards, people who are designing clinical trials, but also trial funders. You can probably imagine a lot of the recommendations that came out of our work requires funding. And when you look at that very small image I popped up around long-term implementation strategies, a lot of those require more funding. So that's where we're at right now, is kind of thinking through what do we need to do to ensure that adding more funding is required. It's not a nice to have kind of thing. These are strategies and solutions that are likely to increase benefit to patients. And so there's going to be a lot of very broad knowledge dissemination for different audiences coming out of my work, but I'll pass it over to my colleague to answer as well.
My answer is slightly different because of the different body of our work, and there's only so much that oncologists can do to get, a practicing oncologist can do to get a drug approved. They don't get a drug approved at the end of the day. A company has to deem it sustainable to bring a drug to Canada, get a label, get it approved by and recommended for funding by HTA, which is the CDA, and then have it go down the rather Byzantine process of funding, which is the PCPA. So at each of these levels, we have regulatory agencies and funding bodies that need sustained applied pressure from all of us to make them more clearly understand that patients are waiting.
Yeah, I just feel that you guys made a very good recommendations from your presentation, and I just hope that it's finally goes to the end users, like approve the drug or the oncologist, and then yeah, it's very important, the next step. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. Nicole, I think you're muted.
I think I'm online, right?
Yes, yes, you are.
Thank you both, Dr. Pollard and Dr. Navani, for these presentations. It's been a wonderful end of process to hear what you have managed to do in such little time and come up with recommendations. My question goes along with what Rosalind discussed earlier. It's unclear to me which of the regulatory bodies at the federal level or at the provincial level, are they all government, or is this collections of various clinical agencies or medical agencies that evaluate this? The reason being, it is a Byzantine system. It's unlikely that anybody in government will want to open that door because of political issues. There's funding transfers across federal to provinces to support the healthcare system, which must be somehow related to all of this evaluation. Is there any way you see that the 14 committees could be sort of compressed into one national committee to work on this problem so that we streamline the efficiency of the evaluations and the recommendations and the funding recommendations within the next 5 years?
Maybe I'll take that. Thanks for the question. Unfortunately, healthcare at its end delivery is a provincial purview, and those kind of initiatives, if it's all provinces together talking about national healthcare, would require constitutional changes, and so that's really hard to fathom. At a step up the chain from that, when we talk about Health Canada, that's not a big delay as in getting a label for a drug, but CDA, Canada's drug agency, previously called CADID, the health technology agency, that process is not as quick as our neighbors to the south, for example, and that, or even our neighbors in similar markets like Western Europe or Japan. So that's the process, the CDA and the PCPA, which are governmental bodies full of health economists, some clinicians, pharmacy representatives, and civil servants. Those bodies are where constant pressure needs to be applied to outline our shared purpose for everyone on the call.
I recently read that. Like this weekend, read that one drug, a cancer drug, I think, was approved by the federal committee and 9 out of the 10 provincial committees. And there was only one province that refused to fund it, which creates a great inequity. I mean, how can you have 9 positive reactions and able to fund it in 9 provinces, and let it go in the 10th province, which by no means, I'm not going to name the province, but by no means is it a poor province. They've got the sizable budget, and I would think they would have jumped on this very eagerly, and it's not done. Is there any way of overturning or having pressure on a provincial decision when something like this happens?
Those are ministerial decisions, so it would have to be a submission to the Minister of Health in that province. So I can't comment more really, but those are generally ministerial decisions. They're often quite rare.
Thank you. And Dr. Pollard, I was involved for 25 years in training medical students. So I have a long list of people behind me. One of the things that I've noticed over the years, and still as myself a patient, there doesn't seem to have been any particular improvement in training our young recruits about how to interact with patients and how to listen to patients. I think it's only when most medical practitioners get a certain level of experience over the years that they can be more sensitive or understand where the question will be coming from and where it's going, and answer it in a considerate way. Some of the young students, and let's face it, when you get to a hospital setting, your chances of being seen by a resident is probably 90% before you actually get to see a specialist. I've seen and heard some incredible things being said by those young kids that would have needed, alerting them to, you don't say this and you don't do this, and it doesn't seem to change over the years. I mean, 25 years, started in 1988, and it's now 2026, and there's no improvement. What about medical associations, or can somebody talk to these people and that they actually impress upon the various faculties of medicine across the country that things have changed? And, you need to consider your patients a little bit more than just a test tube?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Nicole. And I think that any opportunity to work in those conversations and, bringing patient advocates and patients into the medical schools to help support those conversations and having, these kinds of topics embedded into med school curriculum, I think it would be incredible, and I would welcome any opportunity for that. And I think it, it's another audience for this work. I think that vulnerability and the perceptions that patients have, the experiences, I think they're so powerful, and I absolutely agree with you that it needs to be built into the curriculum for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're a few minutes past the hour, so I think we'll have to stop there, but those were some great questions and answers, so thank you. Before we wrap up, Rosaline, did you want to say a few words about the forum event coming up?
Yes, so this is another initiative by patients, also partly driven by Dr. Beauchemin. So we have coming up the Pan-Canadian Patient Forum. It is this first iteration is called the Precision Oncology from Hope to Impact, created by patients, for patients, caregivers, and families. We'll have the English event on April 26th and the French event on May 3rd. I think that Veronique has put the links for our registration in the chat. So you hear from patients, clinicians, and researchers as they share real world experiences and answer your questions about personalized cancer care. I hope that many of you will be there, and please spread the word to your networks. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank